I remember standing in front of the mirror on the morning of my 40th birthday. I was brushing my teeth, same as always, in the same bathroom I'd used for years. Nothing had changed, at least, not on the outside. But that morning felt different. I wasn't just seeing a few more lines on my face or more gray hairs at my temples. I was looking at someone I didn't fully recognize. I had the house, the job, the family. I had the checklist of adulthood mostly filled out. I had done what I was supposed to do, went to school, got a degree, climbed the ladder, paid the bills. And yet, something in me felt hollow, not broken, just unlived. It wasn't depression, not exactly. And it wasn't a midlife crisis in the cliche sense, no sports car, no sudden career quit. It was something quieter, like a whisper from a part of me I'd been ignoring. A question echoed in my head. Is this really the life I was meant to live? It's a question more people ask than we realize. And often, it arrives around the age of 40. Some call it a crisis. Some call it an awakening. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and pioneer of modern psychology, called it the beginning of real life. Life really begins at 40. He once said, "Until then, you are just doing research." It's one of his most quoted lines. But what did Jung actually mean? He believed that up to age 40, most people live outwardly shaped by family expectations, social roles, and the need to survive. But after 40, if we allow it, we begin the process of becoming who we truly are. It's not easy. It often begins with discomfort, confusion, even pain. But it's also where depth, meaning, and authenticity start to take root. I didn't understand it at first. Like most people, I thought I just needed a vacation, or maybe to change careers. But what I really needed was to stop running from myself. Carl Jung called this inward journey individuation. It's the process of becoming whole, not perfect, not impressive, just whole. It means integrating all the forgotten, repressed, or neglected parts of ourselves, the childhood dreams, the quiet voices, the lost passions. It means meeting your shadow, Jung's term for the parts of us we hide from the world, or even from ourselves. That longing you buried in your 20s, that rage you've swallowed for decades, that urge to create, to express, to be more than your resume. That's your shadow. And at 40, it starts knocking louder. For me, it didn't show up in dramatic ways. I didn't burn down my life. I just started noticing the numbness. The things that used to excite me didn't anymore. The goals I once chased now felt irrelevant. And somewhere deep down, I knew if I kept ignoring this feeling, I'd slowly fade out of myself. That's when I stumbled across Jung's writings. And for the first time, someone put words to what I was going through. He explained that this discomfort wasn't a sign of failure, it was a rite of passage. Midlife isn't the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of the beginning. Think about your childhood dreams for a moment. What did you want to be when you were 10? A painter, a musician, an astronaut, maybe just someone who could roam the world freely, feeling the wind, asking questions, and laughing a lot. Then what happened? Life, bills, deadlines, expectations. A checklist disguised as a roadmap to happiness. Somewhere between wanting to explore the stars and trying to meet quarterly sales targets, we became something else. Efficient, responsible, productive, but not necessarily whole. Carl Jung argued that in the first half of life, we're supposed to build our ego. That's not a bad thing, it's essential. The ego is the part of us that functions in society. It says, this is who I am. This is my job. These are my values. This is what I stand for. We need the ego to survive, to build, to compete, to become someone. But here's the problem. Most people confuse the ego with the self. They think their identity is the whole story. But the ego is only a mask. The deeper self, that quiet, honest, yearning part of you is far more mysterious. And it often lies buried under decades of pleasing, proving, and pretending. For example, a woman spends 20 years working in corporate law. She's successful, respected. Her LinkedIn profile is impressive. But at 43, she begins to dread getting up in the morning. She can't explain it. Nothing bad has happened. But her body starts to say what her words cannot. Fatigue, anxiety, headaches, a feeling that time is slipping through her fingers. She eventually admits it. She never wanted to be a lawyer. She wanted to write stories. She buried that part of herself when she was 22. And now, her shadow wants to come out. That's not immaturity. That's not a midlife crisis. That's the self reclaiming the wheel. This is the pattern Jung observed in countless patients. People who appeared successful on the surface, but were falling apart within. They weren't crazy. They were simply waking up. Jung believed this moment, this ache, this stirring is sacred. It's not something to suppress or medicate or run from. It's a doorway. a crack in the ego that lets the deeper self finally breathe. But why does this shift usually happen around 40? Because by then, you've built enough of a life to realize that no amount of money, praise, or comfort can fill the emptiness that comes from being a stranger to yourself. You've climbed the ladder, but now you're wondering, was it leaning against the right wall? This is where many people panic. They think something is wrong with them, but Jung would say, no, something is finally right. This is also why so many great stories begin after 40. Vera Wang didn't design her first dress until she was 40. Morgan Freeman wasn't a household name until his 50s. Julia Child didn't become a TV chef until she was almost 50. Colonel Sanders franchised KFC after 65. It's not that their talents didn't exist before. It's that now they were finally in alignment with themselves. They stopped trying to live up to what they were supposed to be and started becoming who they truly were. Let's be clear. This path isn't always smooth. It often begins with grief. Grief for the years spent trying to be something else. Grief for the dreams we ignored. Grief for the parts of us we silenced in order to survive. But Jung would say that grief is the beginning of healing. Because when you face it, not avoid it, you create space. Space for joy, for depth, for real connection, and finally, for peace. They call it a midlife crisis, but the word crisis might be misleading. Because when most people hear that term, they think of someone panicking, buying a sports car, divorcing their spouse, or quitting their job to find themselves in Bali. But that's just a stereotype. In reality, the midlife crisis isn't always loud. It's often quiet. It creeps in slowly, in traffic jams, Monday meetings, empty dinner conversations. It shows up in phrases like, "Is this all there is? I don't feel like myself anymore. I should be happy, but I'm not." Carl Jung didn't see this phase as a breakdown. He saw it as an initiation, a moment when the psyche begins to pull away from the external world and turn inward. In his view, the first half of life is about expansion, building a place in the world. The second half is about integration, asking, who am I? Really? And here's the truth. Most people never say out loud. That question terrifies us. Because what if the answer is, I don't know? That's when the mask begins to slip. The career you've devoted 20 years to no longer excites you. The relationship you thought would fulfill you now feels distant. Your hobbies feel pointless. Your ambition begins to fade. But behind all that confusion is something powerful, a turning point. Because only when the false self begins to crumble can the real self start to rise. This turning point often feels like loss, but it's not a loss of self. It's the shedding of what's not you. The ancient Greeks had a word for this kind of transformation, metanoia. It means a fundamental change in the way you see your life. And that's exactly what midlife can be if you let it. Let me tell you the story of Marcus. Marcus was 46, a vice president at a large company, 2 kids, a loving wife. From the outside, everything looked great. But inside, Marcus felt like he was fading and he began to dread Mondays. He'd come home and sit in the car for 10 minutes before going inside. Not because he didn't love his family, he did, but because he didn't know how to explain the hole he felt inside. He tried yoga, then a new diet, then a therapist. Finally, in one session, the therapist asked, when was the last time you felt fully alive? Marcus paused, then said, college. When I played music every day, that's when it hit him. He hadn't touched his guitar in 20 years. Not once. That night, he took it out of storage. It felt like a reunion with a version of himself he thought he'd lost forever. A year later, Marcus didn't quit his job. He didn't move to a cabin, but he started playing music again. Joined a small weekend band, played open mics, and that saved him. Not because music replaced his life, but because it reconnected him with his self. The midlife crisis isn't about blowing up your life. It's about finding the pieces of yourself that you left behind and weaving them back in. It's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something real is trying to emerge. But there's something else Jung said that's important here. You cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of its morning. You can't live your 40s like you lived your 20s. What once motivated you status? Security. Success may no longer satisfy you. That's not regression. That's evolution. Because real wisdom begins when you stop chasing and start listening. Listening to what your soul wants, to what your body knows, to what your inner voice has been trying to say for decades. That's the beginning of individuation. And here's the paradox. You don't need to become someone new. You just need to stop betraying who you've always been. Let me introduce you to 3 people. 3 very different paths, but one common thread. They all found something true after turning 40. First, there's Nadia. Nadia was a nurse for over 18 years. She was good at her job, calm under pressure, deeply caring, respected by her team. But as she approached 42, she started feeling a quiet dread before each shift. It wasn't burnout. Exactly. She could still do the work, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. What she couldn't stop thinking about was baking. Yes, baking. It started small. She would bake cookies for her coworkers, cakes for family birthdays. But the joy it brought her was disproportionate. It lit her up in a way medicine no longer did. One night, after a particularly hard shift, she came home and told her husband, "I think I want to open a bakery." He looked at her like she had lost her mind. They had 2 kids in school, a mortgage, responsibilities. But she started small, selling cupcakes at the local farmer's market on weekends. Then she took an online pastry course. 2 years later, she opened a tiny bakery with pink walls and a chalkboard menu. It wasn't easy. There were months when they barely broke even. But Nadia told me, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not pretending, and that is priceless. Then there's Derek. Derek spent most of his life avoiding his emotions. He grew up with a father who didn't believe in feelings. Man up was a daily command. So Derek did what most men do. He buried it. He became a solid provider, worked in construction, bought a home, raised a daughter. But when his daughter turned 16, she started pulling away. They didn't talk much anymore. She said he was cold. At first, Derek got angry, then defensive, then sad. One night, he found an old box of letters his mother had written him before she died. He hadn't read them in decades. He sat down on the floor and cried for over an hour. The next day, he signed up for therapy, not because he was broken, but because, for the first time, he wanted to understand himself. Now, at 51, Derek is learning to speak a new language. Vulnerability. He sends his daughter voice notes every week. Sometimes she replies, sometimes she doesn't, but he says, "I've lived half my life pretending I didn't feel anything. I don't want to waste the rest of it doing the same." That is transformation. And finally, meet Lisa. Lisa was always the good girl. Valedictorian, Ivy League, married young. She became a lawyer because her parents said it was the smart path. She did everything right. But at 45, she started waking up at 3 a.m. with a knot in her chest. She wasn't sure why. Her marriage was stable. Her job paid well. But she felt invisible to others and to herself. One night, she saw a flyer at her gym. Beginners acting workshop ages 40 plus. Welcome. Something inside her whispered, "Go." She laughed at first. Her acting? She hadn't been on a stage since 8th grade. But she went, and it changed everything. She remembered what it felt like to be in her body, to use her voice, to be seen, not for what she did, but for who she was. Now, Lisa still works part-time as a lawyer. But every Thursday night, she takes acting classes. And every 6 months, she performs in a community theater production. She says, "I used to think becoming myself meant quitting everything. Now I know it just means including more of me." What all 3 of these people have in common is not that they reinvented their lives, but that they reclaimed parts of themselves they had abandoned. They didn't find freedom by escaping. They found it by returning to their creativity, their voice, their truth. And each of them said the same thing, in different words. "I wish I had done this sooner, but I'm glad I didn't wait any longer." Here's the quiet truth no one tells you. You don't have to burn down your life to change it. You just have to stop editing yourself out of it. These aren't stories of midlife crisis. They're stories of midlife courage, because it takes real bravery to listen to that inner voice after decades of ignoring it. To say, maybe I want something else. Maybe I am more than my job title. Maybe it's not too late to begin. And it isn't. When we're young, success looks like climbing. Climbing the corporate ladder. Climbing the social ladder. Climbing out of our past. It's vertical, measured, goal-driven. But something shifts as we grow older, especially around 40. We begin to crave something different. Not more, but meaning. Not faster, but fuller. Not climbing, but rooting. Carl Jung believed that the second half of life requires a new kind of ambition. Not the ambition to dominate or outperform, but the ambition to understand ourselves, what youth found and must find outside. Jung wrote, "The man of life's afternoon must find within." This is the part most people miss. The second half of life is not a copy of the first. It's not about repeating old victories or chasing faded dreams. It's about discovering a new definition of success, one that isn't written in numbers or titles, but in depth, peace, wholeness. For some, this means slowing down. For others, it means starting over. It might mean taking up gardening, or mentoring, or healing relationships long ignored, or writing the book you've been afraid to start. Success at 25 might be owning a business. Success at 45 might be owning your truth. And maybe for the first time, You realize you don't need to be everything for everyone. You just need to be fully you. But here's the catch. The world doesn't always reward this kind of success. It doesn't give you trophies for emotional growth, no headlines for healing, no gold stars for becoming more whole. But your soul knows. And the people closest to you, your children, your partner, your friends, they feel it. They feel when you're no longer pretending, when you're speaking from the center of your being, instead of some borrowed script. That's real success. Let me ask you something. If you died tomorrow, would your tombstone say what your email signature says? VP of Sales, Marketing Executive, Senior Consultant? Or would it say, she loved deeply, he listened with his whole heart, they helped others grow? In the end, no one remembers your title. They remember how you made them feel. They remember who you were when the mask came off. And that's the gift of midlife. That's the power of turning 40 and beyond. It gives you the chance to drop the performance and finally live as the person you were born to be. The takeaway. So what does it mean to truly live? It means you stop outsourcing your worth. You stop living on autopilot. You stop chasing things you don't even want. And instead, you start asking better questions. What makes me feel alive? What parts of me have I silenced? What does my soul want from me next? It's not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that journey, it doesn't start at 20. It begins at 40. So if you felt a stirring, a shift, a soft whisper telling you it's time for something more, don't ignore it. Don't silence it. Lean into it. Because you're not late. You're right on time. Thank you for watching. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone you love. Someone who might be standing at their own turning point, wondering if they're too late to start over. Remind them, the real life begins at 40, and that life is waiting.